Hey everybody, this is Pastor Nick, and this is Wednesday's Word, in which we take some time to reflect on what we've been reading in Scripture together as we've been moving through our Read Scripture Together challenge. In this challenge, we're reading through all 66 books of the Bible, and we're seeing how each of these books actually tells one story that points to Jesus. And right now, we're in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is this beautiful book in which what's happened is the Israelites have now arrived at the promised land for the second time. It's a new generation of people, and before they go into the land that God is giving them, Moses reminds them of their covenant with God. It says this is what it means to be God's people. And one of the things that I find so interesting is how in the middle of this book, there's a whole law code. And it's not just their ritual and ceremonial laws, it's actually their civic laws. These laws contain rules about how to settle debts, how to treat your indentured servants, what to do in cases of manslaughter, how to ensure that criminal trials are executed fairly and justly, what to look for in terms of good witnesses, how to treat the rulings of judges, and so on and so forth. And now, we often read those rulings and we're like, wow, that seems really backward. And certainly by our standards today, they are. But again, we have to read it in its original ancient context. And what we see is in the ancient context, these laws are light years ahead of the societies around them. See, many of the societies around the Israelites at that time, it was might makes right. The kings could do whatever they wanted. But Moses makes really clear, he says, no, your kings are to be subject to these laws as well. Even your rulers are supposed to be held accountable. And more than that, what we see is in these laws, there's so many provisions for people who would have been those most vulnerable, most taken advantage of. I mean, back in the ancient world, if you fell into debt and you became an indentured servant, that was essentially, that could be a life sentence. It's essentially slavery, and yet we see in the laws of Deuteronomy that there's pathways in which indentured servants could pay off their debts and be set free. In fact, every 7 years, they were supposed to settle all debts and wipe the slate clean and let them go, restore to them their property and their lands and their households. I mean, this is something that was just unheard of in the ancient world. And this theme of justice is one that we're going to see runs throughout the entire Bible. In fact, the prophets pick it up later on in the Old Testament. They talk about how they say, this is how you've broken your covenant, Israel, is that you have not looked out for the foreigner and the orphan and the widow in your midst. You have not pursued justice for the most vulnerable. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, because what Deuteronomy is reminding us as Christians today is that justice and pursuing and seeking justice is a fundamental part of our theology. It's woven into the very fabric of the biblical story. You know, yesterday we posted a video from the Bible Project talking about this theme of justice. And if you want to, I'd encourage you to go back and watch it. It's right here on our Facebook feed. And it's a beautiful explanation of what the biblical definition of justice is. And what we see is that it's not just a one-to-one thing. It's something that's supposed to structure all of our society, all of our communities. And that we as people are called to partner with God in ensuring that even the most vulnerable are protected. And that's why I think it's great that we're in this book right now, because we are in a moment as a society where we have these calls for systemic justice and systemic reform. And rather than reacting against that and saying that that's not a priority for us, we should say, no, that's a part of our theology. And so what is going on, and how can we as people of faith through our vocations partner with what God is doing to bring about transformation? And some of us have vocations that are directly related to law and order and justice. Some of us don't. We're just citizens, but we have a voice and we have the ability to speak into how our workplaces are structured, or how our communities are organized, or who our local officials will be. We have these amazing opportunities to participate in what God is doing. And so this book invites us to look at what's going on through that lens. And right now, in particular, you know, we have those within our societies and in our community who are saying that the promises of this nation and of justice for all, liberty and justice for all, haven't been carried out evenly or equally through the course of our history. Right now, there are those in the Black community who are lamenting and who are calling out for help. And our first response to that should be to listen. I love that Pastor Mark said that before his message this past weekend. He said, we have to listen, and we have to learn, and we have to care. And I think that was a great reminder to me. I mean, I've been learning a lot over the past couple weeks just about what does it look like for us to pursue that. And some of the statistics that I've been coming across really are leaping off the page to me. I mean, just take a listen to this. The Black community makes up only 13% of the U.S. population. And yet, according to the CDC, 22% of COVID-19 cases and 23% of COVID-19 deaths are from the Black community. 44% of those in the Black community have lost a job as a result of the financial downturn. That's according to the Pew Research Forum. And that should force us to ask questions about why is that? Why is healthcare so hard to find in these communities? Why is it that according to the database for monitoring police violence, that it shows that a Black person is 3 times more likely than a white person to be killed in an encounter with the police? We should be asking questions about what is going on there and how can we bring about change, real transformative change, not blame or shame, but actually transformative change. How can we join in this journey? It reminds me of something that I read just a couple weeks ago. This was a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that he gave in 1968, a speech called The Other America. And keep in mind, this is 4 years after the Civil Rights Amendment was passed. He says this, he says, "I think that America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so, in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay." What powerful words that just remind us that, we should care about this. And embark on a journey of learning how we can have eyes to see and then hands to help participate. Which is why, as you're continuing to read through the Bible, start looking for how justice is defined and what implications that has for us as people of faith. But I would also encourage you to learn more in our current context. I love that Mark invited us to listen, and so I'm posting 2 other links with this video. The first link is to a video of a talk given at a Gospel Coalition conference. It's a talk given by somebody that I've learned a lot from. His name is Charlie Dates. He is a pastor on the south side of Chicago, and he gave an amazing talk about what does it mean to truly pursue a vision of reconciliation between our various racial communities in the United States. The other talk actually comes from the founder of the Veggie Tales, of all people. He has a podcast now called Holy Post. And in one of his podcasts, he actually just recounted the history of systematic injustice and racism in the United States that I found extremely helpful, very, very clear. It's not long, but it's just a wonderful invitation to truly listen and to learn so that knowing our history, we can move forward in a different way. So wanted to post those for you all. I think that they'll be helpful resources for you as you continue to engage in this. And as always, as we're moving through this study together, be looking for these various themes. We've had themes of salvation, we've had themes of covenant, now we have themes of justice. And that's just one more thing to kind of be paying attention to as you move through the story. So I hope that helps you as you continue to work your way through Deuteronomy. I hope you enjoy the rest of that book. And also stay tuned here. We're going to be scheduling some more Q&A sessions. We still have to cover Leviticus as well as Numbers and Deuteronomy. So be looking forward to when those events will be coming up. We'll do those on Facebook Live. But may God bless you as you continue to move through his word and as you continue to learn how this word informs how we live today and points us to the redemption and the salvation that Jesus ultimately brings. So it's in the name of Christ, who is indeed our King. I want to say God bless. Have a wonderful rest of your week.